Spiritual Life Center, transforming lives as we love, serve, and remember who we are. One heart, one mind, one soul at a time.
Well, welcome to another Wow Unplugged with Celia Coughlin-Surridge and me. I'm Reverend Deborah Phillips, and tonight we're going to be talking about the afterlife. And I believe, Celia, that the way I described our discussion about the afterlife was not what you were expecting.
Yes. So my current perspective has always kind of revolved around what happens after you die, because I'm still searching for answers like what happened to my dad and yada, yada. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's an interesting description. We'll get to that. But the first question I want to ask is, what do we believe happens after we die? Because you get conflicting reports. I grew up the majority of my life thinking there was a heaven and hell, and depending on what you do in your life will depend on where you end up. And then I learned about the idea of limbo. And then I learned that in Judaism, there apparently is no afterlife. And then the final straw for me was Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think that's how you say his name. I heard a very logical argument on how nothing happens, that your body basically decomposes and like literally nothing happens. And he said that, and I realized at that time that completely destroyed everything I believed, because all of my life I apparently did soak in what my grandparents said, which was that there was an afterlife, whether or not I agreed with what it looked like. So anyway, he made that argument, and it upset me because the idea of nothingness bothers me, clearly. So, Deborah, what do you think?
Well, the idea of nothingness bothers all of us. What we teach in unity and in metaphysics is that this is consciousness. Okay, I am not a body, or I am not my body. I am a soul. Let me put it this way. Maybe you can just edit this part out and start over. What we teach in unity is that we are souls with bodies, not bodies with souls. And so there's consciousness. And if you ever stop to try to think about, where did you start? Have you ever just said, as a little kid, I used to sit there and go, okay, where did I start? What can I go back to the beginning, and where did I start? And it feels like I've always been. Mm. And so that was, I think, my first experience into consciousness. Mm-hmm. So consciousness doesn't end. And we just teach that, once we leave this body, we go into the higher consciousness. And this gets really complicated, and we don't need to go there today. But it's like, some people believe that we are reincarnated. Some people just feel like we go into the consciousness. We don't believe in heaven and hell. We just believe that, there's a higher and higher and higher vibrations. Let's put it that way. Hmm. So we actually lower our vibration to come into a body. And then as we leave the body, our vibration becomes higher. And so you can't see us anymore, and then it just keeps higher and higher and higher. And theoretically, at some point, you go back and completely blend with the one source again. Hmm. Does that make any sense? This is not the easiest stuff to talk about.
No, it's not. And I mean, that's the thing, is that when you have grown up with grandparents who instill this idea of basically like a cloudy planet in the world where everyone is happy and running around because you were a good person. And then, I've studied many religions, and like the Mormons, for example, believe that there are like the 3 tiers and planet Xenu or whatever. Maybe that's Scientology, but anyway, but the majority of, the religions that Western religions maybe have this concept of that place that you go to. And, it's just for me personally, when I feel very still angry over the fact that my father passed away when I was 19. The idea that I will never see him again really bugs the crap out of me. And that's the nicest way that I can possibly put it. So I think that's a really great segue into the rest of the conversation. You know, it's obvious because all of our conversations at some point in time have touched on my father's passing being such a huge influence in my life, and how I am obviously still very, I mean, obviously I can tolerate it a lot more than it originally happened. And I don't think anyone ever gets over grieving the loss of somebody like your father, but I still have a lot of anger and issues over that. And I could just keep rambling on and on and on about that. So Deborah, take it away.
So the difference between us is that my father died when I was 21, and he had been ill, but he had been ill for 10 years. And so when he actually finally died, I was like, what? No, we've been living with this so long. But I had absolutely no question in my mind from the time I was a little kid that we don't actually die, that there is, and partly because they would visit me, and I just knew that there's more to this life. So that helped me. My 20s were really awful. It was very, very hard. And I completely lost my way for a while. And yet there was this part of me that knew that he wasn't completely gone. And when I talk about, our life after their life, that's partly is this whole conversation about, you thinking that you'll never see him again, as opposed to on some level, he's still with you and he's always with you. And so, we teach consciousness that there's no end to consciousness. And so that stream is always there, and we're all part of each other. One of the most interesting conversations I've had is Claire Kinsley, who runs the book group on Wednesday morning. Mm-hmm. And Claire and I have known each other for a long time, and we were having a conversation one day. Her brother had died, and she couldn't quite understand why she was so upset about it, because she wasn't close to him at all. And I went through that with my sister, because we were fine, but we weren't close. And when she died, I had a really hard time for almost an entire year. And so we were talking about that. And we had also been talking about, somehow in there, the fact that we're all mirrors for each other, right? And she stood there and she sat there and she looked at me and she says, that's what it is that when someone dies, you lose a mirror. So you lose somebody who's reflecting yourself back at you. So it's like losing a part of yourself, actually losing a part of yourself, because you lose a mirror. And it was like, wow. And we sat there and stared at each other for a while and went, that's a really interesting concept, because it is like you lose a part of yourself when someone, especially close to you, dies. I mean, my sister and I saw each other maybe twice a year. And yet I felt like this, and she was 7 years older. And I felt like this entire chunk of me was gone. And when Claire had that revelation, it was like, wow, so that mirror is gone, but they're not gone. They're done with whatever they came here to do. And we're not done. And we get to keep on keeping on. There is a book called Journey of Souls by Michael Newman, I think. And have I talked about this before? I swear I have, but maybe not in here. But anyway, he was a psychologist, and he was doing past life regressions with clients. And one day somebody regressed to being in between lives. And so he started working with that. And for 20 years, he did regressions, or whatever, how many years, he did regressions with people back to where they were in between lives. And in reading the book, there was a lot of it that felt very real and very right to me. And there were times that I'm going, yeah, really? But there was a lot of it that resonated with me. And so it's an interesting book. And I've talked with other people, and they've had kind of the same reaction, that some parts of it felt right and good, and other parts it's like, yeah, really? So it's not something that I would recommend anybody to read and go, oh yeah, that's the whole answer.
Right.
But, I honestly think you almost have to believe in reincarnation to be able to get to an afterlife, because to me, an afterlife where you just go up and play with a harp and, like fluff up your wings or something makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I can get that. It's interesting that you put it that way, because I do, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, what would I do up there anyway?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and the idea is that, with a lot of, I mean, there's different theories of reincarnation too, because there's like, the countries where they will just step over someone who is laying on the ground because, well, that's their karma. And the way I look at it, and many in the Western world, is just like, well, yeah, but you still help them, because that, excuse me, because karma is not punishment. Karma is simply a reaction to an action. That's all it means, is it means effect. So, but if you just think in terms of, so we're done, we move on out of this body into another place, go to school in another dimension, meet people in another dimension. I mean, and there's all kinds of, I mean, because you can read every theory in the world out there. And what it comes down to really is, in your own heart and your own mind and your own meditation, you'll discover what your consciousness tells you. But losing that mirror, losing that connection to that person who is reflecting so much back to you, is really, really hard. And especially when you're young, and especially when it's sudden. And so there's that figuring out how to be here when they're not here. And then there's this wondering of, well, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to, I think we are all terrified of completely disappearing. I think we're, the whole conversation about the ego is so terrified of dying. And that's why we struggle so much.
Yeah. Well, and for me, even more recently, I've been really struggling with the thought of leaving George, on his own, just because I know what it did to me, when my dad passed away. And also there is that part of me that wants to see and be a part of everything, and it's interesting because, when my grandparents passed, my grandfather passed, several years after my father, and my grandfather was that first introduction to grief that I know. And that's actually what brought me to Spiritual Life Center, because I had all of those questions of, what happens in the afterlife? Why did I see him when he clearly did not have a soul? I was looking for all of those answers. And then when my grandmother passed away, there was such a sense of relief, because it was so obvious that she just didn't want to be here anymore, and so I had a totally different grieving process with her for that reason. And never once have I felt her presence. Now, she flat out told us, actually, in her eulogy at her funeral, that she would never be looking down again, because she was going to be spending so much time praising Jesus and God up there, that even the sheer fact of looking down upon us would be like a form of shame or something like that. I don't know. Interesting conversation to have with her after I'm gone. But anyway, the thing with my grandfather is that I felt him, from time to time. Like, I feel like that he is around. And that's another reason why my dad bothers me so much, because I don't necessarily feel him around as much. But it's interesting, because I think you've even talked about it before, that whole grief process, that what we're taught is the grief process isn't really necessarily the truth. And I'll let you elaborate on that in a second. But, it's been shared with me numerous times that the grief process, the way that we're taught it isn't actually how it is, because some people don't go through the anger stage because they had reached acceptance. Some people don't go through the bargaining stage. Like, I don't feel like I ever went through bargaining, because it was a done deal. So anyway, I'm going to let you actually.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote Death and Dying in, I think, the 70s, maybe the 60s. I don't remember. And she talked about when someone is told that they are going to die, they go through these different stages. And I don't even remember what they are. I probably should have done the research before we had this conversation, but I didn't, because that's who I am. And and but all of these different stages, and somewhere along the way, somebody turned that into the stages of grieving. And it's a very different thing. It's like someone's told they're going to be dying. One of the things, they're going to they bargain with God for a while, right? Well, you're not going to be bargaining with God after someone's died. I mean, you can, but you're probably not going to be, God, please bring them back. I mean, so if you really look at those quote stages, they don't make a lot of sense when we're talking about recovering from the loss of someone very close to you. Mm-hmm. And I think recovery is probably a better word, because it always stays with you. It becomes part of you. And it's what you do with it, and what you learn to do with it, and what lessons you take out of it. And also the stages, nothing is discrete. I mean, you're going to have one day when you're angry, one day when you're just so happy that they were in your life. And then the next day it was like, I couldn't stand them anyway. And then the next day it was like, see, because you're looking, when someone dies, you get to look at all the aspects of that person. And they become gods or goddesses for a while. And then you start thinking about all that other stuff that they did. And then at some point it evens out, and you just see them as a person who lived their life. Mm-hmm. There's no, and some people can work through having someone die in their life fairly quickly, and other people just don't recover. And part of that's resilience. Part of that's how dependent we are on the person, our age. I mean, my father dying when I was 21 is probably what made me who I am today. Mm-hmm. It turned me into a complete survivor.
Yeah. And that's, something I have worked towards accepting, is that my father's passing is a huge reason why I am exactly where I'm at in my life and who I am, for sure. And yes, to your point too, how it defines people depending on age. I mean, I actually think there's a statistic that the majority of married couples that experience the loss of a spouse within like 3 years, this other spouse is gone, because for the majority of the time they don't want to be separated, which is exactly the case with my grandparents. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I completely 100% get that. So, for someone like me who is still dealing with the whole anger thing, sometimes I've thought that like there are grief classes, right? But sometimes I've wondered if going to like AA or Al-Anon would be way more effective because of the 12-step program when it comes to my grief process and just accepting it. But I don't know. I mean, what is your direction?
Well, what if you stopped trying to accept it and simply acknowledged it as something, and then worked with it? That I have a real personal difficulty with the word acceptance, because in my head, when I hear the word acceptance, it means, okay, I'm accepting it. I'm powerless. I'm stuck with it. But when I acknowledge something, then I have wiggle room. And it's like, we have to acknowledge that these people are dead. They're gone. They're not with us anymore in the physical flesh. Mm-hmm. So I acknowledge that, but I don't accept that they're completely gone. And that's semantics. But the truth is everything in consciousness, everything is consciousness, and we're expressing ourselves through symbols, and those symbols are words and sounds. Mm-hmm. And so the symbols and sounds that we use are what make up how we deal with this life. And so semantics, we play a lot with semantics in the metaphysics, and there's a reason for it. Because I can say a word and it will mean something to me, and it will mean something completely different to you. Mm-hmm. That's true. And then we're going, but, and it's like, okay, so I mean, almost everything that I do in my teaching is about helping people look at these different things and say, okay, what does it do for you? What does it do for you? What does it do for you? And then, and if that word doesn't work for you, what word works for you? My Thursday morning group, we completely rewrote the Lord's Prayer over about 5 months, just playing with the words and what the words meant with them. And it was an amazing experience. And there were 2 or 3 people in there who came out of very strict religions, and they just said the Lord's Prayer by rote. That meant nothing to them, and it was so cool watching us redefine the words, and I could see their eyes light up when that prayer started to mean something to them. But I digress. But it's the whole acceptance. In my mind, when I'm accepting something, I'm giving up. When I'm acknowledging it, then I'm saying, okay, this has happened, but what can I do with it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I remember I was really ticked off after my sister died for lots of reasons. And I didn't expect to be, because we weren't all that close. And part of it was I realized that I don't like anything that's final. I mean, that's as final as it gets.
Yeah.
And I didn't appreciate that at all.
Right.
You know, and so I just acknowledged that I was really ticked off about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me, it's like, okay, I don't have to accept being, you know, it's like, I don't like it. Okay, that's where I am right now. And then take another step.
Right. It's interesting you say that too, because, you know, I work with a therapist. Anybody who does, good on you, because having a therapist, I think, is a good idea, especially in this day and age. But, you know, she brought to light that whether or not I liked it, I may need to actually forgive my father for passing away. And that's along the lines of what you're saying is the acceptance realm. And that in itself irritates me, because I feel like it's kind of like when I got snippy at you during our original conversation about how, you know, I don't feel like he was given a choice in the matter, nor do I feel that his life was complete. I feel like he could have done a lot with his life if given the chance. But the sheer fact of forgiveness and thinking about it in that way may help me move closer to the acceptance. I realized when she said that I'm not willing to even use that word in this area. And then that made me realize, just looking at that feeling like, okay, maybe that's actually what needs to happen then. Because it's kind of like what you're saying, these people being mirrors. If you are conscious of kind of what you're thinking and what you're working through, things you are pushing against, there may be a truth to them that you don't want to see. And so I try to remain open and realize that maybe that whole forgiveness thing is what needs to happen. One thing that we did also discuss after that was that, you know, taking time to appreciate the lessons that I'm learning from his death is also a huge thing in this whole grieving process. Like, I have an opportunity now, unfortunately through his death, but I have an opportunity now to actually better my health. Like, having heart disease and dealing with health issues is now something that's on my radar, which if this had not occurred and happened later on in his life, what would that actually mean for my trajectory, you know? And that's, you know, still not an enjoyable way of thinking about it, but, you know, I do have an opportunity to work on my health and make sure that the things that are in our family history aren't as prevalent by making dietary changes, exercise changes, and just being aware. But that, of course, still doesn't change the fact that I could walk out tomorrow and the sun could explode, or I could be hit by a bus, you know?
True. But, you know, what we teach is that you are not, you're not obligated to carry on the family tradition of dying early, or, I mean, that's one of the core teachings that we have in Unity. And if you look at what Bruce Lipton teaches, is that our cells work from the outside in. And that was one of the very, very newest things to come out. And he was going against the entire scientific community by coming out and saying this.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's what we bring into ourselves. And, you know, the consciousness of my parents, who were born in the early 20th century, like 1913, 1912, and their consciousness about, you know, aging and dying and all of that is very different from ours now. And even your dad, I mean, he comes from a different, you know, even a different generation. I personally believe that we each come here for a reason, and we have something to do. And when we're done, we're done. And I know that that's not working for you at the moment. And that's just absolutely fine, because, we all get there, we get through it different ways. So one of the things that you were talking about forgiveness is, just as an aside, is I stopped forgiving other people a long time ago. And what I started doing was forgiving myself for attracting the situation. So and there was another book that I read, talks about that if I'm forgiving someone, there's an energetic exchange, right, between two people. And then if it's over and then I turn around and forgive them, I'm reactivating that energetic exchange again. And I don't know where I got to, if everything's a mirror and we're attracting these things into our lives, maybe I should just forgive myself for attracting it. And there was an incident from my childhood, which was fairly traumatic. And I went into that radical forgiveness thing. And I thought, because people kept telling me I needed to forgive the other person because they were about to die. And they didn't, but they were about, and I thought, I'm not going to forgive that person. And I went through the self-forgiveness thing. And after I did that, I didn't need to forgive the other person anymore. I got rid of my own baggage about what I was carrying about it by forgiving myself for attracting the situation. And it doesn't mean I'm a bad person for doing it. It's just I attracted something I didn't like. And, there will be people, if you go through some of the classes they've had at SLC, they said, well, you and your dad had a contract where he was going to do this and he was going to die on you when you were 19. I mean, so you can get really cold-hearted about it too. And it's, this is life, and it's messy and it's hard. and it's can be lots of fun, and it's not fun sometimes. And so finding our way through, first of all, what happens when we're not here anymore. And that's dealing with our fear of disappearing and also our fear of losing other people. And then how do we live here when they're gone? I mean, this is an extremely confusing and difficult and interesting thing that happens with us, but it's not easy. Of course, there is, I never did get that little memo that said life on Earth is easy. I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for that.
Oh my gosh. No, and that's, when I catch myself in the horrible loop of thinking about all of it, I feel like I think of the injustice of, the children who die of cancer. I think of the injustice of people who die in their countries because there isn't health care. I think of the injustice of war and, even the pandemic that we're currently going through. And, it's interesting because those are all injustices that I can't control. There's nothing that I can do about it, but I find myself hung up on it. When I was a kid, I'm realizing this now. Of course, when you're a kid, you don't realize this, but I'm so sensitive. Like, I really had no idea that I was really this sensitive. But I remember having like a complete and utter personal meltdown. Like, I knew if I told my parents that they would just be like, you're ridiculous, calm down. But I had like a complete and utter meltdown one day because all of the words for movie titles were going to be taken. Like, I like, I know that's ridiculous, but was a clear indication of what kind of person I am, right? Where things like that were bothering me as a child, and now as an adult, things that are totally out of my control are still bothering me. So what I'm trying to say is, how do we, especially during this really anxiety-ridden, trying time, try to push the anxieties of the death, the dying, the not being here, the ego away. And this may be a whole nother conversation we need to have, but that is where I always come back to is I need to stop worrying about the movie titles. I need to start making the movies. Do you understand the analogy here?
I get it. And here's the deal is you don't push any of it away. You stop and you go within and you get in touch with that still point within yourself, where you can get in touch with and experience and feel the ongoing, unfailing, unstoppable energy of life. and understanding that we all come here to have experience this world. And I'm sitting here watching this, and it's hard. It's very hard to watch, especially the level of fear that is being engendered right now. That probably bothers me. Well, there's two things that bother me. That's the one that bothers me the most, is that how much fear is just being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, because people are dealing with their lives and their choices in their lives and what they've come here to do anyway. And then we have this level, but it is also I've been in this I've been in this for like over 45 years. And so I just, after I have my kicking rocks moment, because I do have them, then it's like, okay, so what is the opportunity here? What can I do with this? How is this helping me to open up and become more conscious, more aware, more compassionate, more whatever? And I'm running through the whole gambit. I'm working a lot on compassion right now because everybody is so testy that I don't want to be compassionate some days. And it's like, wait a minute, you know what? Everybody's struggling.
Yeah.
So back off, woman.
Yeah, it's like the Brene Brown quote, which I'm not going to be able to quote directly, but paraphrasing, she said, you have to believe that everyone's doing their best.
And this is the truth, that everyone is doing the best they can with what they've got in the moment. And it's like people who get on the road and do really dopey things when you're driving along. I would say the number of people who are doing all of that stuff and intentionally is minuscule. Most people are simply driving and they're not present. And so they cut you off, or they drive for 15 miles with their left blinker on. And no matter how much you run your blinker and flash your lights at them, because they're not present. They're driving, but they're not present. And it's like the lights are on, but no one's there. And so I really work with that a lot. It's that, the bodies are walking around, but a lot of people just aren't present to what's going on because there's so much pain. There's so much difficulty right now. And some of the times people leave their bodies completely when there's so much pain in the world. That's why some people die. They just can't. And I'm not talking about people who take themselves out. I'm just talking about, I'm done. I've done my work here. And just because a person is young when they die doesn't mean they're not done. Doesn't mean they didn't accomplish whatever it is they came here to accomplish. But you have to have that whole belief system that goes along with that to get behind that one.
Well, right? I think what I'm hearing is that if you're struggling, then creating your own mission statement will do a world of wonder, something that you can say, I'm on this earth to do. That's what really makes a huge difference. And then being able to, integrate that with a meditation practice, maybe a journaling practice, self-care, turning off the interwebs for a while. But yeah, I mean, to get a little nerdy on everybody, when JFK was president, what was the mission of the United States? Which was to put a man on the moon. Like, that was the singular mission statement. And I remember there's that story about how, he went to NASA and talked to a janitor, and he said, what brings you to work every day? And he said, to put a man on the moon, and he's the janitor, right? But he's contributing to that mission. And so I think that that's a really good nerdy analogy on how having a mission statement in the work environment we've become more mission oriented. Even our community with Spiritual Life Center has become more mission oriented. Having something to focus on helps to kind of cut down on all of the noise, because you actually have a direction. And so having your own personal mission statement is I think actually pretty important in this type of a realm, because it gives you an opportunity for something that every day, you're waking up and living for. And I think a lot of times with religion, and anyone can disagree with me, that's totally fine with me, but they wake up in the name of Jesus, and that's their personal mission statement. That's great. They are alive for Jesus. I choose that my personal mission statement would be to be in service to this world and make a difference. And if your interfaith I think just choosing one God to wake up to every morning, you know, maybe you'll have a card deck next to you and you'll pick it out in the morning. Anyway, I'm just joking and getting a little interfaithy nerdy now. Anyway, what I'm saying is I think that's kind of what you maybe we're talking about. I hear that.
And I think, Celia, that is probably the best synopsis of this entire conversation. And I think it's a really good way for us to go out on. So thank you for joining us, and may the joys of the world go with you.
Spiritual Life Center, transforming lives as we love, serve, and remember who we are. One heart,